Welcome back, everyone. This is Just Two Assholes Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Matt Bowen.
And I'm Daniel Powell.
And this is episode 13. So we're going to do a little short one because we stayed up right now. It's 1 a.m. We stayed up watching the World Series game and watched the Dodgers win on a walk-off home run.
Yeah, the 18th inning, longest game in World Series history. We wanted to record earlier and maybe get more content in this one, but that game was too good to pass up. We had to keep watching it.
Yeah, so for this episode, we're just going to go over the matchups, who we think is going to win, and it's going to finish it up. So this is going to be a shorter podcast. So to start it off, we're going to start off with my game. So Tyreek Hill versus the Dalvin and the Chipmunks. So Thursday night game already happened, so we're recording. This is Saturday morning now at 1 a.m., but... So DeAndre Hopkins actually had a pretty good game, 23 points for Dalvin and the Chipmunks, but I am still going with my team. I do have faith, so I'll talk about my team a little bit. So Stafford versus Seattle. Seattle's defense isn't very good so far compared to the last couple seasons. They are top 5 against quarterbacks, though, so they do hold them down a little bit. They do not – their games really aren't shootouts at all, so – Stafford, if he can get 15 to 18 points, I'm happy with that against the Seattle defense. But I got Todd Gurley and Philip Lindsay. Todd Gurley, he's the number 1 running back in the NFL right now, and he's playing like it every single weekend. He was my number 1 for top 5. Same thing with you, Dan.
Yes.
We can't really say too much about him because he's the best. Philip Lindsay, so reports came out that Royce Freeman's actually going to be out for the game. So Philip Lindsay is going to get a majority of the carries, which is decent. That's awesome, especially against Kansas City, which they are not the best running back or defense at all. So they are 31st in the league against running backs. So against New England, they let up 34.5 points. Cincinnati, 7.5. But that was their lowest scoring against a running back was 17 or 7.5. Besides that, the lowest scoring was 17.5. So that's pretty decent. I'm expecting a lot out of Todd Gurley and Philip Lindsay. Probably close to 50 points between just those two. And then we got, for my wide receivers, Stephon Diggs. We know that he's not the number 1 on that team. We've already been praising Adam Thielen for his production, and hey, he deserves it. So Stephon Diggs, so they did trade. They're playing New Orleans, so they did trade for Eli Apple. So we'll see if he's covering Stephon Diggs, because I feel that either Lattimore, which he hasn't been what he was last year, is going to cover him, or they might move him over to Thielen. But if he gets Eli Apple, he could probably burn him for 1 or 2 because he's already played the Giants so far this year. And he had a pretty decent game. Tyreek Hill against Denver. This is going to be a pretty good matchup. Denver's secondary is pretty solid. Their defense is starting to turn around. So right now against receivers, their defense is 13th. But they have some pretty good corners out there and some pretty good safeties. So last game against Arizona, they let up 24.5 points against the receivers. But just think of this. All of their receivers only had 13 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown. So that's decent for a whole team's wide receiver core. So Tyreek Hill, just the Chiefs' offense is so explosive, and it seems like he always gets his. It really does. He at least gets a touchdown a game. I mean, he either that or he has 9 catches for 54 yards, which is still 9.5 points. That's 10 points. But yeah, so I'm looking for at least 12 to 15 out of Tyreek. Trey Burton. So Austin Hooper's on a bye, and Trey Burton actually came back alive last week. He had 22.5 points, 9 catches for 120 yards and a touchdown against New England, too, which New England's defense has been turning around a little bit. So the Jets right now against tight ends. Sorry. Oh. Take me back.
Pretty good. They're 9th in the league, actually.
There we go. So we'll see. Trey Burton, he is a good red zone target, and Trubisky at least throws it to him when he needs to. He's big on third downs. He's getting those short conversions. So Trey Burton, if he gets 6 catches for 60 yards, I'm happy with him in my tight end position. And then I actually switched out Corey Clement, who really hasn't done anything for Philadelphia's backfield since he's came back. They're playing Jacksonville. I don't like that matchup, so I actually switched out John Brown for Carolina, and he's actually someone that I drafted and have not started yet, but He's averaging 13 points a game, 12.9 a game. He's ranked 13th in the league for wide receivers. So, hey, it's time for him to get my starting lineup. And against Carolina, too, let's see what they're at. They are 15th, so right in the middle of the pack for wide receivers. And John Brown, these last couple weeks, has turned into the number one wide receiver for that offense. So hopefully you can get at least a touchdown for me. My weak link seems to be the Lions defense. They're playing Seattle. If Russell Wilson goes off, this is going to be a sucky move for me. But the Cowboys, who I actually had to pick up the Lions. I was hoping to pick up the Colts, but someone else snagged him. So I had to pick up the Lions today. So they're playing against Seattle. Like I said, maybe 5 points. But hopefully they don't get any negative points for me. And then Dan Bailey, he's been phenomenal ever since he got signed so far this year. And they're playing against New Orleans, so that should be a high-scoring game. So yeah, I am picking myself to win.
Yeah, and I'm also picking you to win here despite being down 23-0 right now. Great game from DeAndre Hopkins. That 23 points helps Dalvin and the Chipmunks a lot, and it almost swayed me over to picking him in this matchup, but I just like the players on your team versus his team a lot better. His quarterback position is much better than yours, I think, with Patrick Mahomes. Denver does have a really good defense, especially against quarterbacks in fantasy. They are 5th right now overall against opposing quarterbacks, but it's Patrick Mahomes. Against any defense in the world, honestly, I trust him more than Matthew Stafford against any defense in the world, But it's the running back position that really swayed me into picking you in this matchup. So Dalvin and the Chipmunks is starting Isaiah Crowell and Javorius Allen. Crowell is a must-start because he will be getting the bulk of the carries as Bilal Powell is out for the year against Chicago, but Khalil Mack is fully healthy. That D-line is going to look a lot better, so I think Crowell has a pretty good game, but nowhere near Todd Gurley's level. Javorius Allen versus Philip Lindsay. Javorius Allen is very, very touchdown dependent. He's a touchdown vulture. If he's not getting those goal line carries, he is basically useless in fantasy. So I think Philip Lindsay is a much, much safer pick here. That being said, if Javorius Allen does get 2 touchdowns in this matchup, it could start to scare you a little bit, but I just don't see that happening. And then he had 23 points from DeAndre Hopkins, and then in his wide receiver 2 spot, he's got Demaryius Thomas. Against Kansas City, this seems like a pretty good matchup, but the Broncos have been relying much more on Courtland Sutton lately than they have on Demaryius Thomas. He has had a couple nice games this year. Week 5 against the Jets, he had 18.5 points, and then Week 6 against the Rams, 12.5 points. But those are his best games of the season. There is a lot of receiving yards to be had against Kansas City, but I just expect most of those to go to Courtland Sutton and Emmanuel Sanders in this matchup, and then also Philip Lindsay. I think Demaryius Thomas might have a decent game, say 8 to 10 fantasy points, something like that, but I don't see him getting a touchdown or exploding or anything like that. His tight end position, Trey Burton is nice, but I actually like his better here. George Kittle is the focal point of the Niners offense. I think right now he's a top 4 or 5 tight end in the NFL and in fantasy. He's just had a really, really great year and looks a lot of people are comparing him to Gronk, but I think he's much more of a Zach Ertz type player where he's just a solid receiving threat anywhere on the field, and especially in the red zone. So I really like him here. But then in the flex, Devin Funchess versus John Brown. This could be a toss-up, but I just like John Brown more. He's been a much more productive fantasy member this year. Funchess has had a couple nice games lately as Cam Newton sort of remembered that he's alive and a part of the team the past couple weeks with 15 points last week, 15.5 the week before that. But besides that, he hasn't been a great fantasy producer, so I like John Brown more here. And then I really like his defense a lot better than yours. It sucks you didn't get the 2 defenses you wanted on free agency, but he's got the Bears defense against the Jets. This is a great matchup for the Bears defense against a rookie quarterback. Khalil Mack will probably feast in this game. Will probably force Darnold to throw 2 to 3 interceptions, I think. This could be a big game for the Bears defense. Then he's got Will Lutz at kicker against Minnesota. This could be a nice spot for him, too. He could score 10 to 12 fantasy points pretty easy, I think, here. But in order for Dalvin and the Chipmunks to win this matchup, I think Javorius Allen needs 2 touchdowns in goal line situations. He needs to have a big game. Demaryius Thomas has to do something, and the Bears defense needs to pop off for something like 25, 30 fantasy points. So I just don't see that happening, and so I have you winning this matchup as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to the wire. I think the margin of victory is probably going to be 5 points either side. But yeah, this is going to be a really good matchup. So we'll move on to the next one. We'll go to your matchup. So I'll let you talk first.
All right, yeah. So the Mean Team Dream Team versus the Tobias Anal Rapist. So the Anal Rapist already had Will Fuller go. It sucks he's now confirmed out for the season, torn ACL, but he got him 20.5 fantasy points this week. So he's already up on me 20.5 to 0, and that's from his flex position. So things are looking good for him. I'm obviously picking my team here. I just like my team this week, honestly. Jared Goff in my quarterback position. I like him this week because he's going to have to keep pace with Aaron Rodgers. I think this is a high-scoring game, a lot higher scoring than we've seen a lot of Rams games this year. There's going to be a lot of deep balls thrown on both sides of the field here. Christian McCaffrey against Baltimore. I'm not super psyched about this matchup. Baltimore has a really, really good defense, especially against running backs. But against pass-catching running backs, they have seemed a little vulnerable. So as long as the Panthers' offense game plans around passing the ball to Christian McCaffrey, I could be in a good spot here. James White against Buffalo. This is a great matchup for James White. Sony Michel is still questionable, I think, but it's looking like he's probably not going to play. So James White will be probably the lead back and their lead pass-catching back. And so he should see 20 to 25 touches this game, I think. And it's going to be a huge spot for him against that really terrible Buffalo defense. Then I've got Mike Evans and Sammy Watkins at wide receiver. These are both games where I just think there's going to be a lot of points scored. Sammy Watkins might not see a touchdown, but should see quite a few targets, a couple receptions. I'm hoping for 9 to 10 fantasy points out of him, and I really need a big game out of Mike Evans here to keep pace with the Will Fuller that Tobias Anal Rapist played in their flex. I need Mike Evans to come out and have 18 to 20 fantasy points in this game, which is very doable against a very vulnerable Cincinnati defense, especially to the pass. Kyle Rudolph at tight end has been a major disappointment for me so far. I traded for him, and he's done nothing. He hasn't caught a touchdown pass since I traded for him like 4 weeks ago. So I need him to come out and do something. The Saints defense, very vulnerable to the pass, but it seems like Kirk Cousins just doesn't like throwing the ball to Kyle Rudolph right now. Hopefully that changes this week. I'm not banking on it happening, but it's not a position I'm super worried about with how my roster is looking so far right now. And then I've got Tariq Cohen in my flex spot against the Jets. This is a great spot for him. Jordan Howard came a little bit more alive last week, but Tariq Cohen still seems like the guy on that Bears offense, so I'm rolling with him. Then I've got the Patriots defense against Buffalo. I dropped the Colts defense to pick them up because against Buffalo, I want any defense that is playing against Buffalo. I'm going to try and target that all season. This is a spot where they could easily see 15 to 20 fantasy points, I think. And then Harrison Butker against Denver. Just having Kansas City's kicker is a good idea because he's going to get you at least a lot of extra points and a couple field goals. So I'm picking my team again, just like your game. I think that's going to be a very, very close one, but I think my team can pull it out here.
Yeah, so I am picking you, the Meme Team Dream Team, to win as well against Tobias Anal Rapist. So I'll talk about Tobias Anal Rapist. So this matchup really came down to the wide receivers for me. So Carson Wentz and Jared Goff. I can see Carson Wentz because Jacksonville has not been themselves. For some reason, they have not been able to pass rush, and it really sucks. But Carson Wentz is, and it's tough too, where Jacksonville is having an issue rushing the passer, and Carson Wentz is getting even better each week and week since he's come back from that injury. So I like this matchup for him. I think he can get 15 to 20 against Jacksonville, unless, this game's in London too, so it's going to be a little different. Jacksonville plays in London every single year, so they might have a system going on. But unless Jacksonville just turns it on and that defense from last year comes back and Jalen Ramsey is just locked down, I like Carson Wentz in this game. And then Mark Ingram, ever since he's been back, he has been on fire. I stand corrected. So the first game he had 20 points. Last game he only had 5 points against Baltimore. Baltimore's a pretty good rush defense, but yeah, damn, I didn't realize it was that bad last week. Latavius Murray, though, since Cook has been ruled out since until week 11, ever since Latavius Murray has been named the starter, he has at least 20 points. He has 21.5 points against Arizona, 20 points against the Giants or against the Jets, and now they're playing New Orleans. New Orleans is not a great rush defense as well, so kind of like the Jets and Arizona, not as bad. Okay, never mind. So they're third. So sorry guys, I guess I'm not doing research. But yeah, so the Saints are third against running backs, but I do like Latavius Murray in this matchup because of the Vikings offense. They spread the ball out so much to not as much Rudolph, but Thielen and Diggs, so the defense can't stack the box. And I mean, Latavius Murray is not a running back that you really need to stack the box against, but the last 2 weeks he has gone off at least 100 yards and a touchdown in both of those games. So against New Orleans, he's the type of running back where if you're first and goal from the 3 or any goal from the 3, you're going to try and get it to him to see if he can use his battering ram and just get into that end zone. Hey, and if he does that and gets 60 yards, that's pretty decent for him. So it came down to the wide receivers. So Golden Tate and Jarvis Landry against Mike Evans and Sammy Watkins. So we talked about how Sammy Watkins and just Tyreek Hill, Kansas City against Denver's defense is going to have a sort of difficult matchup, but you know that Kansas City is going to go off. But for Golden Tate, he's really been touchdown dependent this year. In his big games, he had 29 points against Dallas, but he had 2 touchdowns and 130 yards. So the last 2 weeks that he's played, so he had a bye week on week 6. So week 5, he had 5 catches for 42 points. Last week, he had 4 catches for 36 points. So Seattle's defense, I already talked about, they're not as good as they has been, but they're pretty decent. Let's see what they are. So they're 8th against wide receivers. So they got destroyed by the Rams, but besides that, they kind of held teams in check against wide receivers. So I don't see a giant game for him, maybe 10 to 12 points. And then Jarvis Landry, he is solid, but he's not getting all the short catches, all those drop-offs that he had in Miami. Baker Mayfield has increased his stock compared to Tyrod Taylor, but Jarvis Landry's only averaging 11 points, which is decent, but I just like the matchup for Meme Team Dream Team as far as wide receivers go. Travis Kelce, he definitely wins this over Kyle Rudolph. Travis Kelce, I believe, is number 3. Number 2 ranked tight end in our league, and I mean, he's averaging 13 points a game. He's solid. But going against Denver's defense, they're 19th against tight ends, so it seems like tight ends are their weakness. Their linebackers are more blitzing, pass rushing linebackers instead of coverage linebackers. So this could be where he shines, especially in that Kansas City offense. We talked about Will Fuller a little bit, Dan did, about him having an awesome game, 20.5 points, but it seems like Bobby McCain really kind of stepped on him as he was going into the end zone on that jump ball, and it sucks that he tore his ACL. It really does. It seemed like in that last game on Thursday that Houston was turning around. I mean, Deshaun Watson had 5 touchdowns, and for just a glimpse of a moment, it seemed like he looked like himself before he got injured last year. When it just sucks for Will Fuller for that streak down the field to catch those balls to go out. He had 5 catches for 124 yards and a touchdown, so that's amazing for him. But it sucks that he's out. But hey, he already got the points this week. Sorry, guy. And then the Panthers against Baltimore. I see this as an ugly game. Honestly, I do. The Panthers' defense is good. They're not decent, but they're good. And then Baltimore's defense is pretty damn good. So they're 8th in the league. So overall, and the Panthers, they have Cam Newton, they have Funches and McCaffrey, but it for some reason it just seems like they can't put a whole game together. Like last week, they were down 17-0. Going into the fourth quarter, and then, hey, something clicked. They shut down the Eagles in the fourth quarter, but, I mean, by that time it was almost too late. They did win, but I don't like the Panthers' defense against Baltimore. Baltimore does not have a good running back position. We already spoke about that, but I just like Joe Flacco. He's clicking this year. Something has happened this year. He loves John Brown. Michael Crabtree has helped, and they have a couple tight ends there actually helping as well. And then Gostowski for New England playing against Buffalo. You know that's going to be a lot of points. Even if they start running the ball only in the second half, they're going to have a pretty decent game. So I am going to get for the Meme Team Dream Team, but like Dan already said, this is going to be a close matchup. There's a lot of good matchups this week, but I am going Meme Team Dream Team for my second pick.
All right, I love your pick there. It's my team, so props on that pick. It's one you're probably going to lose, and I'm going to lose as well because my team has just been dropping games all over the place this year, but I'm banking on a win here because I got to start winning games now in order to make the playoffs.
Yep.
Moving on from there, we'll go to I Ain't No Fournette's son versus the Dick Dangla. And in this matchup, I have Fournette's son winning, and I believe you have Dick Dangla winning, correct?
Yep, I got the Dangla.
This is the one game this week where we are different. So it's not enough for me to make up enough wins to tie you or pass you in our overall standings, but I'll just eke it out one game per week if I have to. So I picked I Ain't No Fournette's son this week because I like Aaron Rodgers in this matchup against the Rams. The Rams defense is very, very, very good. They are 7th in the league against opposing quarterbacks right now, but none of those quarterbacks are as good as Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers isn't fully healthy. He said he's not sure if he's playing with that full knee brace still or not, but I'll take 70% of Aaron Rodgers versus almost any quarterback in the league, honestly, other than maybe Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, those guys. I'll take 70% of Aaron Rodgers over everyone else. Kareem Hunt has a really, really nice matchup against Denver. I really think this is a game where he pops off. I think he has a better game than every wide receiver on that Kansas City team, except for maybe Travis Kelce. I think Kelce has a big game as well, but this is a spot where I could see Kareem Hunt rushing for 100 yards and having 40 receiving yards and a couple touchdowns here and there. I think this is a 20 to 30 point game for him, honestly. And then Doug Martin against Indy. Doug Martin will probably get the start here because Jalen Richard isn't really a 3-down running back, and Doug Martin hasn't been in many years, but he proved at one point that he could be. So I think the Raiders come out and give him the bulk of the carries, probably a 60-40 situation. Jalen Richard is in on like the 3rd and longs and stuff like that. But Doug Martin should see a lot of touches and a lot of opportunities against an Indianapolis defense that is 19th in the league against opposing running backs, so worse than average. So this could be a good spot for him to see 10 to 12 fantasy points. Then you've got Tyler Boyd and Tyler Lockett at wide receiver. I really like Tyler Boyd in this matchup. I like him more than Devontae Adams on the other side of this matchup here. Tyler Boyd is going to see a lot of targets and a lot of catches and probably a touchdown against Tampa Bay because Tampa Bay's defense is truly horrible, especially against opposing wide receivers. Tyler Lockett, this is a decent spot for him against Detroit. Detroit's secondary is really, really good. I don't know if they have the speed to keep up with Lockett, so I think this could be a game where you see Lockett have like a 60-yard touchdown reception, and that's the bulk of his points. If that doesn't happen, this is a tough spot for him, but I kind of like his chances to get something like that done. I'm not a huge fan of Vance McDonald against Cleveland. The last time they played, Vance McDonald had 0 receptions, 0 points, did nothing, but he's had a fairly good season otherwise. He's 14th in our fantasy league right now as far as tight ends go, so not a horrible spot for him, but not a great spot by any means. And then Josh Gordon and the flex, I really, really like this play. The Patriots are going to be up by 21 points at halftime, but I think 2 of those touchdowns could be to Josh Gordon here. Tom Brady loves him, and he was in 95% of the offensive snaps last week. He'll probably see 100% this week, and he's a great red zone target. I think this is a really, really good spot for him against a very weak Buffalo defense, and he's really one of the main reasons I'm picking I Ain't No Fournette's son here over Dick Dangla. And then the Jets defense against Chicago. Decent spot for them. Chicago's offense isn't amazing. They look good against the Patriots, but the Patriots defense is sort of so-so this year, not your typical Bill Belichick defense. If Trubisky is on like he was last week, then this is a tough spot and the Jets could struggle here, but I just don't trust Trubisky yet to be that, top 10, top 15 type quarterback. And then Robbie Gould against Arizona. I love this matchup for his kicker. Robbie Gould is one of the best kickers in the league, and Arizona is a very, very soft defense that gives up a lot of points. So this is a good spot for him.
Yeah, so it's going to be a tough matchup, but yeah, I did go with Dick Dangla. And to start out with Tom Brady, so we already talked about Josh Gordon, so it's kind of like if Tom Brady does throw a touchdown, it's going to help Dick Dangla, but then it's also going to help I Ain't No Fournette's son, and it's going to help him a little bit more. But I see going against Buffalo's defense, they are not good at all against quarterbacks besides Kirk Cousins. But so that skews the number a little bit because against Kirk Cousins, let's see, Minnesota, they let up 9 points, Tennessee, 4 points, Houston, 5 points. So the numbers are a little skewed, but I could see Tom Brady in the first half maybe getting 3 touchdowns, or at least the first 3 quarters getting 3 touchdowns and 300 yards. That's the decent games. That's at least 20 points, 25 points in our league. Going against, and then we got Alvin Kamara against Minnesota. This is going to be a tougher matchup than they had last week against Baltimore, but because the Vikings is 7th ranked. But Alvin Kamara, for some reason, it seems like as soon as Mark Ingram came back, his value just plummeted. But he did surprisingly get a goal line touch last week, and he took advantage of it. He had a 2-yard touchdown rush, which usually that all just goes to Mark Ingram, just battering ram in. But he had 7 catches to go in it for 67 yards. So, hey, that's decent for Alvin Kamara. I'll take him against Minnesota. Maybe he can get 10 to 12 points, but that's decent. So TJ Yeldon is really him and Jared Cook for this matchup is kind of just the toss-up. So TJ Yeldon, so Fournette is out, but they did trade for Carlos Hyde, and he had the week to sit out, and they're playing Philadelphia in London. So Philadelphia's run defense is pretty decent this year. Let's see what they're at. They are at 4th overall. So this could be a touch matchup, but what I'm relying on is his pass catching ability. So he might not be the best rusher, but he is definitely a pretty good pass catching running back out of the backfield. If he can catch maybe 8 passes for 40 yards and then rush for another 40, that's pretty decent for him. So the running backs are decent, not great for Dick Dangla. And then for the wide receivers, it seemed like a wash for me against I Ain't No Fournette's son. I could see Emmanuel Sanders and Tyler Boyd have similar numbers, and then Devontae Adams and Tyler Lockett having similar numbers. Just because Devontae Adams is playing the Rams, that is a tougher matchup for wide receivers going up. It's 11th, so top 11 in the league. Devontae Adams, though, with Aaron Rodgers getting healthier and healthier, so this is where it turns. So Tom Brady and Devontae Adams is on Dick Dangla, and then Aaron Rodgers and Josh Gordon is on I Ain't No Fournette's son. So it all depends who gets the touchdown catches, who gets the receptions. And then Emmanuel Sanders, I like him. He's been their number 1 receiver on their team. He's taken over Demaryius Thomas. He's 5th overall for wide receivers in our league. So the last 3 games, he had 11.5 points against the Jets, 20.5 against the Rams, and then 24 against the easy Arizona Cardinals. So I love this matchup for him against Kansas City. Kansas City, besides last week, they did show up, but that's because they had a couple of pick sixes. The rest of the times, they let up at least 180 yards and a touchdown, either or, against wide receivers. So, hey, I love Emmanuel Sanders in this. For some reason, he's the slot receiver, which, what's his name? Case Keenum loves throwing that to Minnesota. And, hey, he's hooking up again with Emmanuel Sanders and making him the wide receiver 1. And we talked about Sutton really being that number 2 guy, so I'm hoping that Emmanuel Sanders gets 100 yards and a touchdown in this game. Jared Cook, though, I mean, he seems like the only solid offensive player for that team. I am betting this pick on Jared Cook, really. So the first couple weeks, he did really good. He had 22.5 points and 27 points in 2 games. But the last 2 games, he only had 4 points and 2 points. But in the Seattle game, they only scored a field goal, so I don't kind of count that. They have to do something. They got rid of Amari Cooper. They have Jordan Nelson there still, but they have to do something for this team, unless they're just tanking, which I hope they're not, but they have to throw the ball around. Derek Carr has to throw it to someone, and I'm just hoping that Jared Cook can get those big catches over the middle. And, hey, maybe it might not be for a lot of yards, but if he gets 8 catches for 50 yards, I'm going to take that. I really am in this league. So that'll be, 9 points? I know that's below average, but hey, if Jared Cook can get that in this horrible Oakland offense, I'd take it. And he doesn't have another tight end on his bench to switch him out, so I'm going to have to live with what he has. Willie Snead for Baltimore against Carolina, he's been all right. Only 7 points a game, so definitely flex position. Ain't No Fournette has the advantage, but Willie Snead against Carolina. We talked about how John Brown should have a big game, and Joe Flacco is just on. I hope that Willie Snead can get six catches for 40 or 50 yards, and that's what he's averaging. He had 49 yards, 54, 40, 56, 55. So it seems like he's sticking around in between that 40 and 60 yard games. So hopefully he can get that. That'll be an average of 11 points. And then the Jaguars defense, it all depends if they show up. if they get those turnovers, if they get those sacks. So Philadelphia's offensive line has been pretty decent, but they have no running game, really, with Clement and Smallwood. So they're going to have to pass the ball. So it all depends if, what's their Mac? If Mac can match up with Ertz for the linebacker and tight end. If they can match up with their receivers and actually hold Carson Wentz to maybe 300 yards and 1 touchdown or something like that, the Jaguars, I'm looking for them at 8 to 10 points, which is pretty decent for a defense. And then Graham Cano, he had 1 point last week against Philadelphia. Yeah, against Philadelphia, and that was the bad week. They came back at the end, so he had no field goals throughout the entire game until the fourth quarter with that extra point because they kept having to go for 2 because they were behind so big. But so they're playing Baltimore, which Lutz last week against Baltimore did have 10 points, so I'm hoping for a similar game for him. But yeah, this is definitely risky. I'm putting my faith in Jared Cook, and hopefully TJ Yeldon can actually get some catches. But yeah, this could be one where you make a game on me, but I just felt like Dick Dangle is going to win this week.
Yeah, and this matchup, Emmanuel Sanders scares me because he should have a huge week here.
Should.
This could be like Emmanuel Sanders could score 25 to 30 fantasy points in this game easily, and if that does happen, Dick Dangle, I think, wins this matchup. So it's really 50-50 for me in this matchup. I just had to go with Aina Fournette's son just because I like his roster overall, their consistency a little bit better, and it mainly comes down to Josh Gordon in that flex spot. But yeah, this is a great matchup, and one of the ones I'm going to be paying really close attention to this week.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a matchup between Fournette's son, which is first in his division, and Dick Dangle is second in his division.
Yeah,
so,
great matchup.
Yeah.
This is a solid game. Moving on from there, we'll look at the Jimmy G Spot Rockers versus Sack Lives Matter. I've got the G Spot Rockers winning this matchup, and you do as well, because I think all of our matchups from here on out are going to be the same. And a lot of this really comes down to Jimmy G Spot Rockers are already up 23.5 to 0. 21 of those points coming from Kenyon Drake. Only 2.5 from the Texans defense, which were your sleeper pick this week for defenses. 2.5 points, not that great. It was a solid matchup and a good sleeper pick, I think. They just didn't really come out and produce against Brock Osweiler and the Dolphins. But that was sort of a revenge game for Osweiler, so I almost understand why they only got 2.5 fantasy points there. But otherwise, Drew Brees has a great matchup against Minnesota. Minnesota's defense hasn't been what it should be this year, and Xavier Rhodes has already been confirmed as out. So I think Michael Thomas has a huge game here. So he'll probably see 12 targets and 11 receptions in this game because they have no one who can cover him, I think, with Rhodes out. And that's just sort of been how his fantasy season has gone so far. If he sees a lot of targets, he sees a lot of catches because he catches everything thrown his way. So I like this matchup for Drew Brees a lot. Nick Chubb against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is, second in the league against opposing running backs. This is not a good spot for him. I don't personally believe in Nick Chubb a lot. There's a lot of hype behind him. He did have 14 points last week, but that was against Tampa Bay, who has one of the worst defenses, passing and rushing, and rush defense in the entire league. He's going to see a lot of touches just because that he has to, but I think this could be a spot where the Browns are playing from behind most of this game, and so he's not going to receive a lot of rushing touches, and then Duke Johnson's going to see a lot of the pass-catching downs. I don't like Nick Chubb this week, but outside of that, the rest of this roster is pretty good. Kerryon Johnson and Odell Beckham Jr. both have really good matchups. Seattle's defense is 17th in the league against opposing running backs for Kerryon Johnson, and he has shown to be that number one overall running back that we said early in the season he should be, and it looks like he finally is. He's had 150 and 100 yards in the past couple of weeks, so really, really solid numbers from him, and I expect him to have a good game here as well. Odell Beckham Jr. has sort of been himself a lot more lately. He will see a lot of Josh Norman this week, which kind of scares me. But this is a matchup that I want to watch. This Sunday, I'm going to be watching this game for sure because I just want to watch Odell versus Josh Norman. Josh Norman hasn't looked like his Carolina self the past couple of years. And on top of that, the Redskins have given up tons of points to wide receivers. They are 20th in the league against opposing wide receivers. So as long as Eli is chucking it up to Odell every chance he gets, it's going to be a good game for Odell. And then Chris Godwin versus Cincinnati. I don't like Chris Godwin personally. He's a decent fantasy wide receiver, but Cincinnati's passing defense is not good. Their number one cornerback, I can't remember his name, is pretty decent, but their number two, who Godwin will be facing a lot, isn't all that great. I could see Godwin probably getting a touchdown in this matchup. I think odds are fairly good. They have liked throwing the ball to him in the red zone this year, so I think we see a touchdown and maybe 50 or 60 yards from Godwin, 12, 15 fantasy points there. And then Zach Ertz against Jacksonville. Jacksonville's defense is amazing, but they haven't faced a tight end like Zach Ertz, I think. Except for Rob Gronkowski, but Ertz is even better this year. And Ertz is going to see his. I think he sees 8 receptions, almost 100 yards, probably a touchdown in this matchup. I think Ertz is going to be the focal point of that offense outside of their anemic run game, which they're going to have to lean on a bit, I think, just because they have to have some balance. Just in order for the Eagles to do well, they have to have a balanced offense. They didn't last week when they mainly passed the ball, and they lost the game. So this is a matchup where I think Ertz sees a lot of catches and their running backs see a lot of touches, but I think Ertz has a pretty good game. We already talked about Kenyon Drake and the Texans defense. He's got Jason Myers at kicker, the Jets kicker, against Chicago. I really don't have much to say about this matchup. It's a decent matchup for any kicker, and Jason Myers is a pretty average kicker. He is number one in the league right now as far as fantasy goes because he has one 27-point game against Indianapolis where he kicked 7 field goals. I don't expect that to be the case this week. I think we see 7 to 10 fantasy points out of him here.
Yeah, and we already talked about how the Chicago's defense should be back this week against the Jets. So Jason Myers should have a lower scoring game this week. But yeah, I also picked Jimmy and G-Spot Rockers. So I'll talk about a little bit about Sack Life Matters. So Mitchell Trubisky against the Jets. The Jets defense. So Mitchell Trubisky has turned on a little bit. Jets defense is right in the middle of the pack, so 15th in the league. So Mitchell Trubisky could get 15 to 20 points a game if he relies on Trey Burton and uses Tariq Cohen, which they've been pretty solid the last couple weeks as far as doing a 50-50 or 60-40 between pass run. They haven't been real predictable on what they're going to do, so that's good. Mitchell Trubisky has been spreading the ball around a lot. Saquon Barkley, he's going to be dominant again. They're playing Washington. So Saquon had 21.5 points last week, 32.5 the week before, 26. So he's the second-ranked running back behind Todd Gurley so far this year. He's averaging 22 points a game, so he should get against Washington's defense, which is 8th. They did hold Zeke down, but the Giants, they have no other option besides Odell and Saquon. They have to go through one of them or both of them, so because Eli Manning is not the answer in there. Kenyon Barner is this one question that I had for, Sack Lives Matter. So Sony Michel is probably going to be out. But I think that's more of an advantage for James White than it is for Kenyon Barner. Because even when Sony Michel went out early in the third quarter and Barner only got 3 points, 10 rushes for 36 yards. Yes, he's going to be, who knows if he's going to be the starting running back. Because, James White could start the game. Kenyon Barner, I think if the New England gets up at the end, or in the second half, which I think they will, he'll probably get a decent amount of carries, maybe 10 to 12 carries, but if he's going to produce out of that. 10 to 12, he could get 50 to 60 yards, which, okay, that's decent. That's 9 points. Hey, but that's not a starting running back position. That's more of a flex position that you want to get. So I do not like Kenyon Barner in this matchup. However, you really don't have any other running back because you're kind of stuck with him because Devontae Booker's been ruled out and he's on your bench. So, sorry to Sack Life Matters. This is a tough position for you. Your wide receivers, though, I do like them. So, A.J. Green matches up pretty well with Odell. A.J. Green has been pretty decent this year. I think he's top 5 in the league so he's number 7 so far in the league. But they're playing Tampa Bay's defense, which is horrible. And we already talked about how Andy Dalton should just shine. That Bengals offense has turned around with Joe Mixon, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, C.J. Uzomah. There's just so many passing options in there. So the Tampa Bay is going to have a rough time against A.J. Green. I could see him having 2 touchdowns again this week with 100 yards or 80 yards. So he should have an amazing game. Marvin Jones Jr. against Seattle. It's kind of like Golden Tate that we talked about. He's been up and down. He's only averaging 8 points a game. Last week he had 3 catches for 20 yards. against Green Bay 2 weeks before. He had 1 catch for 8 yards. The most catches he's had in one game is 4 catches. So he is a red zone target, but I don't know. I mean, when Kerryon Johnson taking more over that offense and it's been more even instead of just pass heavy, Marvin Jones Jr.'s value does go down. And they're playing against Seattle, which, let's see, so they're 8th against wide receivers. So that's top 10 in the league. So they do a pretty good job as holding the wide receivers down. So this could be a tough matchup. So good thing you have A.J. Green to kind of even that out. But that does drag down A.J. Green's numbers. I mean, it really impact for your team. So that's one of the reasons I did not pick you. David Njoku was in both of our top 5s, I believe, for last episode against Pittsburgh. We like him ever since that. Him and Mayfield have gelled. They really have. Ever since Mayfield came back, he's had at least 7.5 points. And ever since then, he's gone up and up and up. So, and against Pittsburgh, against tight ends, they are 30th in the league against tight ends. So this is a good defense to throw to your tight end against. For your flex, you got Robert Woods, which it's looking like Cooper Kupp might be out right now. He's doubtful, but who knows? They're playing against Green Bay, which this should be a pretty big game for them. So if Cooper Kupp is at least 80 or 85%, I see him coming in the game. He is going to take Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks' value down. Not so much because he probably won't be 100%, but it's still going to bring that value down. But since Cooks has been out, you had 14.5 points for Woods and then 9.5 for Woods these last 2 games. So that's decent for your flex position. If he can get you to 10 points, that's pretty good. So the Colts defense, you stole him from me. Good job for you, though. They were in both of our, I believe, top 3 for our defenses against Oakland. We talked about Jared Cook a little bit. Oakland has to do something on their offense, but I don't see them doing that. The Colts have a pretty decent defense, but the Raiders' offense against opposing defenses is 28th in the league. The last 2 weeks, defenses going against them. So the Chargers got 16.5 points, and Seattle last week had 19.5 points. They had 6 sacks last week, and I can see the Colts defense getting 10 to 12 points in here, so that's pretty good. And then Matt Prater against Seattle. Matt Prater is pretty average. He's 13th so far in our league, so at a 12-man league, he might not should have been owned, but they're playing against Seattle. Maybe they have some rough times getting into the end zone, so he does have to get a few field goals. So I could see him get maybe 8 points. But yeah, again, I'm going with Jimmy G spot rockers. Sorry, sack life matters, but I think Jimmy G is going to win this one.
This is a matchup where I almost want to change my pick after looking at all the matchups as far as positions go. But it comes down to one thing. So right now, the Sack Lives Matter is starting Mitchell Trubisky, who is 10th overall in our league right now, over Andy Dalton, who I think is 14th. I think if he starts Andy Dalton here, this is a much closer game, and I almost want to pick Sack Lives Matter in this matchup. Are you okay with me changing my pick here? I'm going to change my pick. I'm going to go with Sack Lives Matter in this matchup, and it comes down to 3 things, really. So, A.J. Green versus Tampa Bay. I love this matchup. He's going to blow up and have a great game. And David Njoku against Pittsburgh. This is a really, really good matchup for Njoku. Baker Mayfield loves throwing him the ball, especially in the corner of the end zone, which we saw last week. So I think Sack Lives Matter. If you're listening to this podcast, which I hope you are, start Andy Dalton over Mitchell Trubisky here, because I just think this is a much bigger upside game for Dalton, and you need that upside right now to win this matchup. I'm going to change my pick to Sack Lives Matter. And I'm going to message you on Facebook and tell you to start Dalton in this matchup because I really want to win this game. But I think Dalton and A.J. Green get you almost 50 fantasy points between the two of them.
Yeah.
And if that happens, this is a matchup you can easily win, especially with your defense is going to outscore Jimmy G Spot Rockers' defense by probably 5 times. Yeah, by at least 10 to 12 fantasy points, I think, because the Colts' defense is going to pop off against Oakland here. So this is a matchup I'm starting to like more in the favor of Sack Lives Matter, and I'm changing my pick.
Ooh, you're gonna text?
Yeah,
you're gonna text Sack Lives
Matter. Sack Lives Matter over Jimmy G Spot Rockers. I'm putting it in my notebook now.
Well, yeah, I mean, with Andy Dalton in there, this definitely does sway, but hopefully Sack Lives Matter is smart enough, which I believe he is. He's been pretty decent this week, and this year, he's tied with me, so I need Sack Lives Matter to win, so I'm a little biased. I need him to lose, so I'm a little biased because right now we're tied in the same division. But yeah, we'll see if he makes that move, and if he does, I mean, Andy Dalton and AJ Green are definitely going to be pretty big this week. So we'll move on to our second to last matchup. So we have Wide Right versus Lucky Neckbeards. This is just going to be a tough matchup for Wide Right. I'm sorry, you're playing the number one scoring team in the league.
This
Lucky
is a really easy
Neckbeards.
pick. Yeah, this is a really easy pick. I'm sorry, Jordan. I'm sorry, Wide Right, but Lucky Neckbeards, I think, in a rout in this game.
Yep. So I'll take Lucky Neckbeards. I'll give you the hard one, the Wide Right. But yeah, so Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen. That's it. I mean, they have just been amazing so far this year. So Kirk Cousins is playing New Orleans, which is 31st against quarterbacks. Okay, he's gonna have an amazing game, and he's gonna throw most of his balls to Adam Thielen, which is the Saints are 32nd against wide receivers, so they are not a good passing defense at all. Adam Thielen, we already talked about last podcast. He's had 7 games in a row with at least 100 yards and at least 6 catches. And, I mean, at the most, he has 14 catches. And, let's see, at 5 out of those 7, he's had a touchdown. So he's the number 1 fantasy wide receiver this year, and he's averaging 20 points a game. Kirk Cousins, you're gonna do. I expect a really big game out of him against New Orleans. This passing defense is not good at all. James Conner, the last time they played Cleveland, it was week 1. I feel like the offensive line was pushing a little bit more to show Le'Veon Bell, just say, hey, fuck you, about talking about how much we're getting paid. But James Conner, last time they played Cleveland, he had 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. I see him maybe not getting the same thing, but if he gets 120 yards, a couple catches, and at least 1 touchdown, that's amazing for him. And Marlon Mack, I did doubt him last week, but he blew up last week. I believe, let's see, he had 30 points against Buffalo, and you're playing Oakland, which, hey, some people could say that Buffalo does have a better defensive line, at least, than Oakland does. So I see Marlon Mack doing at least maybe 22 points in this game. I'm not going to say he's going to do 30 because that's a pretty great week.
That's rare numbers. It's Todd Gurley numbers.
Yeah, so right now he's only ranked 40th in the league, but that's because he didn't really start too many games. But he took over that number 1 running back position these last 2 weeks, which we talked about last episode. Against Oakland, this is a very favorable matchup for him. For wide receivers, I already praised Adam Thielen. Great job. And then Alshon Jeffrey. Surprisingly, I have him in another league, and I'm so happy. So the last 2 weeks, he's at 23 points and then 17.5 points. Since Carson Wentz has been back, he's been good for at least 7 catches, 70 yards, and 1 touchdown. He is Carson Wentz's. Probably he and Zach Ertz are his favorite targets in the red zone, which, hey, those are great options to have. And then playing against Jacksonville, we already talked about how Jacksonville has been lacking the passing defense so far this year, and I like this matchup for him. Eric Ebron, Indianapolis versus Oakland. We already talked about how Oakland's horrible. However, they are 10th against tight ends, but Jack Doyle is coming back as well, so I don't like this matchup so much for Eric Ebron. It does help that they're playing a sucky defense, but Jack Doyle is going to be back, so I see Eric Ebron maybe getting 6 to 7 points because Jack Doyle is Andrew Luck's favorite tight end. But hey, when Jack Doyle was out, Eric Ebron kind of shined. So they can't really turn a blind eye to him. They kind of have to share the ball 50-50. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in that game. Raheem Morset, that's actually some player that I actually had to ask you about for San Francisco. So I'll let you talk about him just a little bit because I really won't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so Mostert has taken over for Alfred Morris as the number 2 running back on that Niners squad. He was an undrafted free agent a couple years ago, a special teams ace, has sort of played all over the place for the Niners, but he's really explosive. He reminds me a lot of Marlon Mack, actually, who he's also starting in this matchup, who he's a fairly patient back who explodes through the hole. He just hasn't seen a lot of opportunity in his career so far. He's had a couple of decent games the past couple of weeks. Against Green Bay, he had 12 carries for 87 yards and 8 fantasy points. Against the Rams have a very good defense, by the way. 7 carries for 59 yards, and again, 8 fantasy points. He's a decent pass catcher, a pretty good runner, and a number 2 running back in a Kyle Shanahan offense is always a good fantasy start. Tevin Coleman has really made a career off of that. So I like this spot for Mostert a lot, honestly.
Okay, yeah, thank you, and especially against Arizona. Arizona is 32nd for running backs against the lead against their matchups. So yeah, that's definitely a good matchup for him. He's not going to be the number one guy, but hey, especially if Matt Breida is not fully healthy, Raheem Morset could get a lot more looks. And then the Ravens defense against Carolina. So Carolina against opposing defense are sixth against the league, or as far as opposing offenses. So that's pretty tough. But I expect this is a pretty good game. I think mid-20s for maybe both teams, at least the Ravens. I think Joe Flacco is going to have a good game. If the Ravens could get a pick or a fumble recovery, that's good. Carolina's offensive line is holding together, but they are not as strong as they have been in the past. And the Ravens defense is always going to be a Ravens defense. They're just mean. They're just dogs for defensive tackles and taking advantage of those offensive guards that have been injured for Carolina. So I could see some pressure up the middle and maybe get a sack or two. It is hard to take Cam Newton down. He is just so big and athletic quarterback. He's kind of like a Ben Roethlisberger. They could have three guys hanging on him and still throw the ball. But I could see a sack or two in this game. And then Greg the Leg Zuerlein, he had, I believe, 12 points last week. 13 last week. And against Green Bay, we've already talked about how should be a high-scoring game because Green Bay's defense isn't the best. So I like Greg the Leg in this matchup.
Yeah, this is a really, really tough matchup for Wide Right. Going through his team, I'll keep it pretty short and simple. Cam Newton against Baltimore, I don't like that matchup. Baltimore's defense is really good, especially against opposing quarterbacks where they are, is it fourth in the league? Second in the league against opposing quarterbacks. Cam Newton is a very good quarterback, MVP at some points in his career. He was MVP one year, but he hasn't looked at that level this year. His running game does scare me a little bit, and he could run all over this Ravens defense and make up the points that way, but I don't like this matchup. LaShawn McCoy against New England. If Buffalo's going to get anything going with Derek Anderson at quarterback, it's going to be through the run game, but LaShawn McCoy is banged up. He's questionable in this game, so I don't like this matchup either. Wendell Smallwood against Jacksonville. Hate this matchup. They haven't relied on Smallwood whatsoever, even though most reports coming out after Ajayi got injured said Smallwood would be the number one guy. He hasn't been. Neither of their running backs really have been either. Antonio Brown against Cleveland, this is the one matchup in his lineup I really like because I think Antonio Brown sees a bit of a revenge game here against Cleveland. They tied with them week one. I think Antonio Brown wants to come out and just demolish Cleveland in this matchup, and I think he probably will, honestly. I think you see probably 20 fantasy points out of Antonio Brown. Unfortunately, that might be half of your fantasy points this week. T.Y. Hilton has a pretty good matchup against Oakland as well. He's been banged up in the past couple of weeks, but he did have 16 points in his last matchup. It was only 4 receptions for 25 yards, but 2 touchdowns. So I don't think you'll see the 2 touchdowns in this game, but I think you'll see much more receptions and yards. I'm thinking maybe 7 receptions, 90 yards, no touchdowns, that sort of game. So probably 12, 13, maybe 14 fantasy points out of him. And then Jordan Reed hasn't been relied upon at all in that passing attack for Washington, which is surprising given that Alex Smith is their starting quarterback and he has shown through his career that he loves his tight ends. Taylor Gabriel against the Jets. Gabriel is very boom or bust. You need him to have a couple of huge catches and he's very touchdown dependent. I don't like this matchup for him unless he somehow sees 100 yards with 2 touchdown receptions, something like that. Eagles defense against Jacksonville. This is a pretty nice spot for them, actually. And he could make up some points here, honestly. Jacksonville, their offense has looked very anemic and very bland. Blake Bortles is starting. That doesn't worry me too much. So I think they could see 12 to 15 fantasy points here from this defense, but that's not enough to make up the points needed to beat Lucky Neckbeards. And then Justin Tucker is the best kicker in the league against Carolina. It's a pretty good matchup. I think he sees probably 12 to 15 fantasy points from his kicker here as well, but it's just not enough to get it done against the Neckbeards. I think this is a really easy pick. Sorry, Jordan. Sorry, Wide Right, but the Lucky Neckbeards take it home here.
Yeah, and I mean, with your bench, you have 3 players on bye, so this is a rough bye week for you. I mean, with 4 NFL teams being on a bye week, these from now on, it's going to get tougher and tougher in fantasy. But yeah, Lucky Neckbeards looks like you're going to go to 7-1.
You son of a bitch.
So the last one, Stairway to Evans versus Team Cortez. We talk shit to Team Cortez every week, and I'm sorry. I'm not picking you again. Stairway to Evans. So you proved me wrong last week. Maybe I need to start picking you so you start losing. But I'm going Stairway to Evans against Team Cortez. So Deshaun Watson did go off for 30 points for Team Cortez, and then Fairbairn, the Houston kicker, had 6 points, which is pretty all right. So 36 points out of 2 players. That's a good start, but Lamar Miller for Stairway to Evans came out on this game. He had 19 points, and that is his best game of the year so far against Miami's defense. So, yeah, the closest game was last week against Jacksonville, 16.5. So he has 200-yard back-to-back games with a touchdown each of those games his last 2 weeks. So, hey, he is definitely helping you out, Stairway to Evans. Jameis Winston, which I believe was your sleeper for top 5 quarterbacks this week against Cincinnati's defense. So Cincinnati is 27th against quarterbacks, and the last 2 weeks, 20.5 points against Pittsburgh for Roethlisberger's, and then 32 against Mahomes. We're not saying that Winston is Roethlisberger or Mahomes, but he can definitely get 20 points against Cincinnati. He can, and he can run the ball a little bit. If they need a quarterback sneak at all, he can steal some points getting over the goal line at the 1 or the 2. So I do believe in Jameis Winston against this matchup. I believe it's going to be a high-scoring game because Tampa Bay's defense is not worth anything, and Cincinnati is not good against the pass. Joe Mixon, so again, Cincinnati against Tampa Bay, the same game. Tampa Bay is 24th against the run, and the last 2 weeks, 18.5 points against Atlanta, and then 18 for Cleveland against their running backs. So I see Joe Mixon getting at least 18 points. I mean, it gets to those numbers. He's been really, really strong this year for Cincinnati when he's been healthy, and he is healthy. And going against Tampa Bay, and Gerald McCoy has already been ruled out once again this week. He's having issues with his health. I believe it's his ankle injury again for him. So that does not help Tampa Bay at all. We talk about Lamar Miller already getting 19 points. So with that, I mean, it could be close to 40, 45 points with his running backs alone. So that is amazing so far in our league. Michael Thomas. So surprisingly, you say that Xavier Rhodes is out. I did not hear that, but hey, they already lost Hughes, their first-round pick, out of UCF. And now with Rhodes getting down, that is not good for Minnesota's defense, especially going against Michael Thomas in that New Orleans offense. Right now, Minnesota is 5th in the league against wide receivers. But, I mean, with your top 2 cornerbacks being out, that is horrible. And especially going against Michael Thomas and Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, you're having to worry about so much. I see Michael Thomas getting at least 10 catches, 80 yards, and maybe a touchdown. If he doesn't get a touchdown, he's going to get 120 yards. I mean, this guy is a catch machine, and especially going against a defense where your cornerbacks are going to be depleted. Juju Smith-Schuster, I like this matchup against Cleveland. He was my number 3 top 5 wide receiver where you had Antonio Brown. I believe he's just going to pop off. Last time he played Cleveland, let's see, he had 13.5 points because 5 catches, 120 yards. He didn't have a touchdown. I believe he's going to get a touchdown this week. So at least 100 yards and a touchdown. So, yeah, I like this matchup for you. O.J. Howard against Cincinnati. So O.J. Howard, ever since Winston has came back, has had 14 points and 18 and 8.5 points. So the average is around 10 points. That's pretty solid for a tight end. And we talk about how Cincinnati's defense isn't the best. They're 29th against tight ends. The last 2 weeks, 18 points and 19 points against tight ends. So for some reason, they cannot. They're good run stuffing linebackers, but not very good coverage linebackers. Which that's actually going to help O.J. Howard. He's pretty big and athletic coming out of Miami, so that's a good matchup for him. Adrian Peterson for a flex. This is a pretty decent, flex position for you. Adrian Peterson is the number 1 running back in that offense. The last 2 games, he's almost had 100 yards, 97 yards, 99 yards. So averaging around 12 points a game so far this season. And going against the Giants defense, they are not good. They're 20th against the rush, so they're not good at all. And then the matchup on that, you actually have the Redskins defense against the Giants, which the Giants are ranked 22nd in the league against opposing offenses. So their offense is not good. We've already talked about how their offense has to go through Saquon Barkley and Odell Beckham Jr. And the Redskins, I believe, can stop them and get at least 8 to 10 points. And then Dustin Hopkins for Washington. We've already talked about against the Giants defense. So this is 3 players for Washington with Peterson, the Redskins defense, and then Dustin Hopkins, where if they can shut down the Giants defense, they're going to have a great game. So yeah, Stairway to Evans, I see you winning once again. And sorry, Team Cortez, but hey, who knows? You could win this week because I picked against you.
Yeah, both of us picked against you last week and you won, so maybe it'll happen again this week. But I did pick against you as well and went with Stairway to Evans here. And a lot of it comes down to his wide receivers, Michael Thomas and Juju Smith-Schuster. Just such a good wide receiver combo. It's going to be great this week as well. You did have Deshaun Watson pop off for 30 fantasy points, though. That is great. I don't think Jameis Winston matches that. I think he's about 10 points behind, so that gives you a 10-point buffer there. I do think David Johnson outscores Joe Mixon this week as well. I think it'll be close, but this is a great matchup for David Johnson now that Mike McCoy has been fired. Moving on from there, Lamar Miller got 19 fantasy points for Stairway to Evans versus Chris Carson versus Detroit. I don't think Chris Carson can compete with 19 fantasy points here, and that's one of the things that swayed me a lot. Carson's been decent this year. He had one game where he got 19 points. He had 32 rushing attempts against Dallas, though, for 102 yards. It took him 32 attempts to get there. I don't think he sees that this week. I think Russell Wilson is much more of the focal point of this offense against this Detroit defense here. I think Chris Carson gets you about 10 fantasy points. Brandon Cooks and Doug Baldwin, this is a solid wide receiver core, but it's not enough to keep up with Michael Thomas and Juju Smith-Schuster. Brandon Cooks could have a really good game. I think Robert Woods and him split a lot of the receptions and targets here, and it just comes down to which one of them gets the touchdowns, really. Doug Baldwin has a pretty decent matchup against Detroit. Detroit right now is 9th in the league against opposing wide receivers, so Baldwin is really talented. He hasn't really put it together this year since his injury. It seems like Seattle just hasn't trusted him, but this is after a bye week, so Baldwin should be 100% healthy and a much bigger focal point of this offense, so that could be good for you there, but it is a tough defense, so we'll see how it goes. I'd like Juju Smith-Schuster more, though. And then at tight end, Benjamin Watson against Minnesota. Minnesota right now is 26 in the league against opposing tight ends, so if you're going to beat Minnesota's defense, it's going to be through the tight end position. But unfortunately, with Xavier Rhodes out, that goes by the wayside, I think, and wide receivers are going to see much more of a bulk of the targets and receptions. I think Benjamin Watson gets kind of left by the wayside. Maybe see some third down receptions here and there for first downs, probably 4 or 5 receptions in this game, honestly. Probably not a touchdown. I don't love this matchup. Michael Crabtree against Carolina. Crabtree's been decent. I think he's a very consistent wide receiver. You're looking at 10 to 12 fantasy points most weeks, honestly. Let's see, he's averaging 9.5 right now, so this is a decent spot for him. I like Adrian Peterson against the Giants a bit more, though. The Rams defense against Green Bay. I love the Rams defense, but I don't love this matchup. Aaron Rodgers is going to come out and try and be Aaron Rodgers. He's going to try and take the number 1 team in the NFC and just score points on them. And so I don't love this matchup for the Rams defense. I wouldn't necessarily sit them either because you still have to start them, I think, because they do have Aaron Donald and that good secondary. But I just don't think this is a game where you see more than 10 fantasy points from them. And then Kaimi Fairbairn got you 6 fantasy points last week. That's decent from your kicker. You hope for a bit more, but it's really not great. On your bench, I'd definitely be starting Rob Gronkowski here over Watson as long as he is playing. Right now he is questionable, but it looks like he's likely to play, I think. So he's definitely the play here over Watson, and that would help you a lot and even this matchup a bit more. And it wouldn't make me change my pick to your team, but it would make it a lot closer in my mind. Outside of that, there's not much more on your bench I would change, honestly. Maybe Fitzgerald over Doug Baldwin here, because Fitzgerald will be playing against San Francisco, whose cornerbacks core is really, really destroyed right now and doesn't look very good. Fitzgerald could have a better game here. I think he has higher upside than Doug Baldwin, and I'd probably start him in an effort to try and win this game. But I'm still going with Stairway to Evans in this matchup.
Yeah, and the only improvement that I can see for Team Cortez is, he has Marshawn Lynch on his bench. I know this doesn't affect this matchup, but Marshawn Lynch is IR, and I looked at the running backs on the waiver wire or the free agents, and there is really no one. The only really person that I see on there is Trenton Cannon, which is going to be the number 2 running back on the Jets since Powell went out. Maybe for the future you can switch out for him, but like I said, this does not help you this week. So yeah, I do see you losing Cortez. But yeah, I think that covers all the matchups so far this week.
I think that's it for this week, man. I think we made it through. So Matt here is pretty sick, so this was a bit of a quicker recap of the matchups and a bit of a quicker podcast for us. Looking at the time, it's fairly consistent with what we've done, but we tried to get through it a bit quicker and just do the matchups. I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think this is a good episode, and we hit the real big thing that I think our listeners want to listen to is the matchups. Because it's really important, and we gave you some good advice, at least in our opinion, some good advice.
Which means it's probably horrible advice.
So, and I mean, you're going to tech stack like matters to fix his lineup. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. But, yeah, so signing off. So, I'm Matt Bowen.
And I'm Daniel Powell.
And just remember to subscribe, like, and comment to our YouTube channel. It really helps. And comment what you like on these podcasts, whether you want some improvements, what you don't like. But yeah, anything helps us with some input. But yeah, so we're signing off. And just remember that 2 assholes are better than 1.